Today what we're going to talk about is the midpoint and distance formulas and how to find those in a coordinate plane. So a coordinate plane is a plane that's divided into four regions by a horizontal line, which you guys know is the x-axis, and a vertical line, which we know is the y-axis. So I drew a little diagram for you that shows you the coordinate plane. Okay, so your coordinate plane is separated into four quadrants, is what they are called. And the first quadrant would be right here. And then from there, it goes counterclockwise.
It's a C.
So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Yeah, you can think of it like a C.
That's what we
Yep.
learned in that.
Yep, exactly. So the location or coordinate of a point, that's given by an ordered pair x, y, which I know you guys have also done before. When we're using our midpoint formula and our distance formula, we're going to rely on these points in order to help us find the distance or the midpoint. The midpoint, Jared, do you remember what the midpoint is?
0.
Just in general. I think you're thinking of the origin, I think.
Oh, yeah.
The origin is 0, 0. But no, so
I math well.
so the midpoint. Just tell me what a midpoint is. Okay, so let's break the word down, right? So if it's a mid, that means
Middle.
it's in the middle, right? And then point is
Point.
a point, so it's a point in the middle, right? Okay, that's exactly what it is. So it's the point in the middle of two other points. Okay, now we found the midpoint with segments, and that's what we were used to doing. Okay, now we're going to find the midpoint in between 2 points. So how do we do that? Well, we have a formula, and you guys already have that written down on your paper. Let's go over what this means. So you have x1 plus x2. So x sub 1 plus x sub 2. Okay? And then you have y sub 1 plus y sub 2. You can think of this a couple of different ways. So when you're trying to find the midpoint between 2 points, what you do is you take the sum of the x coordinates and you divide them by 2. Okay, so you'll have 2 x coordinates, you'll add them together, and you'll divide by 2. The reason why you're dividing by 2 is because you're cutting it in half. You're trying to find the halfway point. Now it's the same with the y. You could do the sum of the y coordinates, and then you're going to divide those by 2. Again, you're dividing by 2 because the point is halfway. So the midpoint is what? Okay, the midpoint is what?
Halfway.
Halfway, okay? So that's why you're dividing by 2. Another way you could think of it is it's the average. So if you add the coordinates and divide by 2, you're finding the average length of those two, which is also going to be in the middle. So if you have a segment like we have here, you're going to have 2 points. So I called my points A and B. The midpoint is going to be marked with an M. And then to label your points A and B, A can be any point x1, y1. So that'll be somewhere on your coordinate plane. B is going to be any point x2, y2. That can be anywhere on your coordinate plane. Okay, then the midpoint would be found by adding the 2 x's together and dividing by what? So you add the 2 x's together and divide by? 2. For the y's, you're going to add the 2 y's together and divide by? 2. Okay, so that's what we're going to do when you're finding the midpoint. So for our first example, it says to find the coordinates of the midpoint EF with the given endpoints. Okay, now the first first thing I do when I'm given endpoints is I label them. So my endpoints are going to be x1 and y1 and x2 and y2. It doesn't matter which one you label as your x1 and y1 and the x2, y2. It's just whatever is with x1, y1 has to be with it. If this is x2, this one has to be y2. Okay, so basically I have two sets of x's, I have two sets of y's. Okay? Alright, so if we're going to find the coordinates of the midpoint, let's go ahead and plug this into our midpoint equation. So I'm gonna give you about 10 seconds to set that up, and we'll check to see if we did it right. Okay, so even if you aren't sure, just take a guess. It's okay if you're not right. Okay, your formula is right above that example. And remember, you are finding the midpoint, which means your final answer should be a point. Okay, it should be a coordinate. Why do I have everything?
I don't.
Okay, Ella, can you tell me what you did to find the x-coordinate of the midpoint?
I did -2 plus 5.
And?
3, and I divided that by 2.
Okay, good. Yep, so -2 plus 5 divided by 2. And then Ella said she got 3 over 2. You can choose how you want to leave that. You could either leave it as 3 over 2 or 1.5. Either way, that would be correct. Okay? Kaylin, what'd you do for the y's? Sorry, Kaylin. I have a Kaylin and a Kaylin. Yeah.
Okay, I set up 3 plus -3 divided by 2, and I got me 0.
Yes, okay, so 3 plus -3 divided by 2. You are going to get 0 here. 0 divided by 2 is just going to be what? 0. What happens if 0 is in the denominator?
It's not.
That's when it's going to be undefined. Okay, now you won't have to worry about that with this because your denominator is always going to be what? 2. Okay, but you can divide by 0. Okay, if you have 0 of something, you can share 0 with everybody. Okay, so you can either choose if you want to write it as 3 over 2, 0, that's fine, or 1.50. All right, now let's do the next example. So S is the midpoint of RT, and then R is, you're given 2 coordinates. It says find the coordinates of T. So with this one, in addition to setting up your equation, I want you to also draw a picture of the situation. Okay, so go ahead and give that a try. Okay, so this one is a little bit different. Okay, so I do want you to draw your picture first and then label it according to the directions. Yeah, this one's a little bit different, isn't it?
No.
Yeah.
I did it.
Okay, so first we're going to draw our picture. Okay, so it says S is the midpoint of the segment RT. So when you draw this, Aiden, tell me what order my points are going to go in.
R, S, T.
Okay, R, S, and T. Okay, so your picture should look similar to mine. Okay, and then Maddie Harris, do we know what R is?
Yeah.
What is it?
-6.
Okay, -6, -1. Okay, Riley, do we know what S is?
Yes.
What is it?
-1.
Okay, and then Kaylee, do we know what T is?
No.
Nope, so that's what we have to find, right? So, do you guys have any ideas on what I could label that? Yeah, Brandon?
What, you can label it?
Uh-huh.
Or how to find it?
And what you could label it. Yeah, X and Y.
Oh,
Okay, so this is some point X, Y. Okay? Yeah, Brandon, do you want to tell me what you were thinking of how you can find your X and your Y?
Well, to get from R to S, you have to add 5 to X and add 2 to Y.
Okay, yeah, so you're thinking of this in terms of distance, right? Okay, and that's a great strategy. So see how this is -6 and this is -1? You can ask yourself how much distance is in between -6 and -1. What is that distance? It's going to be 5. So if this is the midpoint, what's the distance going to be this way? 5. So if you do -1 plus 5, what are you going to get?
4.
You're going to get 4. Okay, I'm going to show you how to use the formula and do it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to find the x coordinate. So I'm going to show you how to set up the equation. And then we're also going to do it this way too, where you can just reason your way through it. So we know that x1 plus x2 divided by 2 is going to equal the x coordinate of the midpoint. Okay, so x1 plus x2 divided by 2 equals the x coordinate of the midpoint. Okay, so if you were to label this diagram, this would be your x1, y1. Which one would be your x2, y2?
The X and Y.
Yeah, point what?
T.
Point T, right? So this would be your x2 and y2. And that's because this is your midpoint. So let's go ahead and plug in what we know. So we know that x sub 1 is -6. X sub 2 is x. I divide that by 2. And then the x coordinate of the midpoint is -1. Okay, so I could also solve that. So if I want to solve that for x, see how this is divided by 2? Yeah, so then Luke, how would I move the 2 over? So,
Multiplying.
yeah, multiplying by 2. And why are you multiplying? I'm talking to Luke. Okay, so see how this is division here? If you multiply, that is the inverse operation of division. Okay, so multiplying undoes the division. Brandon, turn around. Okay, so if I multiply each side by 2, let's look and see what happens. What is 2 divided by 2? It's just 1, right? That's why we're able to cancel these out, because it would just make 1. Okay, and then -1 times 2 is -2. So I have -6 plus x equals
How come you don't multiply?
-2.
Never mind. Never mind.
Okay, and then once you do that, now all you have to do is add 6 to both sides. and then you'll get x is 4. Okay. And again, you can go ahead and check. From -6 to -1, we knew that was 5 units across for your x. Okay, so you'd have to add 5 to your x coordinate. We can do the same thing with y. Okay, so I'm going to give you a few seconds to just set up your equation first, and then see if you can solve it. And then we're going to check our answer using the distance method, so just counting the distance. But see if you can set up your equation. Okay, so Ethan, can you tell me what your equation was?
To get y.
Yep.
Okay. I did -1 plus y divided by 2 equals 1.
-1 plus y divided by 2 equals 1. All right, do we agree, disagree?
I agree.
Looks good. Okay, so again, it's the y1 plus your y2 over 2, which equals the y coordinate of your midpoint. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to solve this. All right? Tony, what's your first step when you're solving?
To multiply.
By?
2.
Yep. Okay, so again, the 2 and the 2 are going to divide to make 1. You'll have -1 plus y equals 2. So then when you add the 1 to both sides, you'll get y equals 3. Now let's go ahead and let's check that. So from -1 to 1, if you were counting on a number line, how many spaces would there be from -1 to 1?
Oh, right.
2 spaces, right? Okay, so -1 plus 2 would be 1. We can do the same thing here. What's 1 plus 2?
3.
1 plus 2 would be 3. That's what we got. Okay, so I'm also just going to put here
Could you just
that for the x's, from -6 to -1, you would add 5 to the x. To the y's, you would add 2. Okay, so you could do -1 plus 5 to get 4. And you could do 1 plus 2 to get 3. And it says, so find the coordinates of t. So your coordinates would be 4, 3. Okay? So you don't necessarily have to use the formula, but I do want you to know how to set it up and be able to solve that.
Yeah, because I did it.
Oh, yeah.
You just multiply the middle number, the midpoint, and then you subtract them.
Oh, okay. All right, other questions for me on that one? All right, then let's talk about the distance formula. So the distance formula is going to find the distance of any 2 points. So I want you to put a nice big box around this. And we're going to look at this formula so we can see what's happening. So in both parts of the formula, you're doing subtraction. So you'll have x sub 2 minus x sub 1, and that'll be squared. And then you'll have y sub 2 minus y sub 1, and then that's going to be squared. When you square a number, it always has to be the same sign. Do you guys know what I mean by that? Yeah, why does it always have to be positive? No, you're saying it right. if you square what? If you square negative, what do you get? A positive, because isn't a negative times a negative a positive? Yep, and then if you square a positive, it's also positive. A positive times a positive is gonna be positive. So whatever you get underneath the radical should be a positive number. Okay, if you don't get one, you're gonna have to check it. This is where using your calculator sometimes is going to hinder you if you aren't using your math skills with it. Because if you get a negative under here, and you don't put that in parentheses when you're calculating that, your calculator is going to tell you it's negative. Because they're reading it as -1 times x to the second power, and they're doing order of operations. Because with the order of operations, exponents comes before multiplication. Okay, so the first part, I would just do that without a calculator.
Well, you could put parentheses in, couldn't you?
Yeah, yep, if you put your parentheses in, then it will do it. Okay, so we're gonna look at page 44, example 3, and we are going to find EF and GH. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and look at that, so page 44, example 3. Okay, now all of you guys have your actual books. Books that you need today, I'll make sure I get all your numbers. It's right
44.
Hey, listen, read. Examples, see page 44, example 3. Okay, so example 3, here's your diagram. Okay, and then the first thing it says to find on your sheet is EF. So what I want you to do is I want you to write down the points EF.
Wait, where does it say to find EF?
Okay, so find out what those 2 points are.
Oh. Oh no.
Okay, so Avery, point E is going to be what? What coordinate point is that? Well, E. So like
What's this
that coordinate point, what's the x coordinate and the y coordinate of E?
Two or -2 and 1.
Yep. Okay, so E should be -2, 1. So you should have that labeled. All right, and then Caitlin, what is the coordinate point for F? Okay, so -5, +5. So once you have those 2 written down, I want you to go ahead and label them as your x1, y1, as your x2, y2. Okay, and it honestly does not matter which one you label. So if you wanted to label the first one x2, y2, you could absolutely do that. Okay, in fact, let's do that for this one.
Hey, macaroni.
We'll change it up so you can see what happens both ways. Okay, so let's call E our x2, our y2. Let's call F our x1, our y1. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to use this with our distance formula, which all I did is I just wrote the distance formula from above, and I put it right there. That way I can carefully plug those in and calculate. Yes. And then y2. What's that? Yes. Yes. constant, you're gonna get the same answer, okay? So now I'm gonna substitute this into my formula. So x2 I have is -2, x1 I have is -5. When I'm subtracting a negative, right, when you have minus a negative, Chloe, what happens there? Just when you minus a negative in general. So like if I do minus -5, what happens? It turns into addition, right? Because what you're doing is you're taking away a negative. If you're taking away something that's negative, it turns into a positive. Okay? So that's why I put +5. So -2 minus -5 is going to end up being +5. Okay? Now with this one, I have a +1 and a +5, so I do see the subtraction here, 1 minus 5. Okay, so Jay, what's -2 plus 5?
That's 3.
Yep, and then so when I square it, what do I get? 9, and 1 minus 5 is?
-4.
Yep, and when you square it, you get?
16.
Good. Okay, so when you are squaring these, for your notes, I did write it out step by step. When you're doing this on your homework, that part you can do in your head, and it's perfectly fine. If you want to skip this middle step and just go to 9 plus 16. And what is 9 plus 16?
Is
25. Now, can you take the square root of 25 and get a whole number?
yes.
Yes. Okay, so EF is going to be 5. If you don't get a whole number, you can just leave it as the square root, unless it tells you to round. If it tells you to round in the directions, you can go ahead and do that. All right, so now I want you to find GH. Okay, so I'm going to give you some time to find GH, and then we're going to check to see if you did it correctly.
You can't even write down numbers. 3 minus +1 squared.
Okay, and Sam, can you tell us what the coordinate is for G?
-1 and -2.
Okay, so -1, -2, do we agree? Yep. Tina, what'd you get for H? Yep. Okay, so at the very least, make sure you have those two coordinates so you can plug them into the formula. Okay, and I'll give you some time to do that. Did. First, go ahead and check your setup. So this one I labeled, this is x1, y1, and this one is x2, y2, just to show you it doesn't matter which one you label as x1, y1 and which one you label as x2, y2. So if you labeled the first one x2, y2, that's fine. If you labeled this one as x1, y1, that's fine. You're gonna get the same thing that we are. So again, we had 3 minus a negative. And Logan, when we do minus a negative, what happens with that? It's a positive, right? So this is really 3 plus 1, which will be what? 4. And then 4 squared is 16. When we do 1 minus negative 2, the same thing happens again. So Xavier, what would you get when you do 1 minus negative 2?
3.
You get 3, and then you square it, and what would you get from that?
9.
Yep. And then 16 plus 9 would be 25. So I wrote this step down just so you could see minus a negative is going to be plus, just in case you're having some trouble with that. And then 4 squared and 3 squared is the square root of 16 plus 9. And then you got 5. Now, like I said, if you don't have a perfect square, which do you guys know what perfect squares are, or what I mean by perfect squares?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
If it's a perfect square, then you can take the square root, and what would you get? A whole number, okay? So like 9 is a perfect square, 16, 25, 36. Let's say you had something like the square root of 17, okay? You could either leave it like that, or if the directions say to round, you can take the square root from your calculator and you can go ahead and round it. Have you guys ever simplified radicals before? So like if you had the square root of 12, would you know how to simplify that? Yeah, you're going to break it down. I'm going to show you how. Is that what you're going to tell me?
Wait, is it like 6
Oh, go
times 2? Like,
What are you going to tell me?
don't you do like 12 over
Don't you do what?
like 12 over 2?
That. You can split it up into this. So isn't 12 4 times 3?
Yeah.
Yeah, so then what I can do is I can split this up into the square root of 4 times the square root of 3. Now that's helpful because what's the square root of 4? 2. So I have 2 square root of 3. So we'll be working on that later on. When you get to algebra 2, you'll be working on that as well. I'm gonna give you the rest of this time to work on your homework from 1.6, which is 12 through 20, and that is on page 47.
147.
47.
Oh, I thought